we're lucky enough to have another Google speaker. So let's move on to that, rather than more of my jibber jabber. So, designing for VR and AR, a pretty straight up one that's obviously very useful when it's coming from Google and when it's coming from the brilliant Mary Cassin. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you. All right. Hello, everybody. All right. So this is designing for AR and VR. First off, let me be totally horrible and plug my Twitter. Feel free to tweet at me if you have any questions or want to talk, or yeah, that's the same as self-promotion. But so I am a user experience engineer, which is a fun term for technical artist or technical director or creative technologist. There's a bunch of different names, but it pretty much boils down to I program and I do art. So that really leads to doing a lot of prototyping. More specifically, I get to prototype on a really cool team called Daydream. And then more specifically, within Daydream, I'm on the Tango team. So I am on Google's AR platform. And yeah. And so this talk might be a little old hat for people who already have been designing and prototyping, but it's always good to review the basics. And so we'll go over AR and VR kind of like design patterns that are good to use or good to remember, and then I'll just give you like a quick glimpse at like what my day-to-day life at Google is. All right, so AR. So these are the two phones currently that have Tango enabled on them. So it's the Lenovo Fab 2 Pro and then the Asus Zenfone. And these are both really cool phones, and just being able to use Tango is really nice. You can see depth, you can place objects in the world. It's really compelling. So actually, I'm going to show you a video of just like a quick snippet of like the magic of Tango. Yay. So now we're going to VR. So if you guys are familiar, these are like PlayStation, Oculus, and Vive. These are more sixed-off, tethered headsets. We focus mostly on mobile VR. And so before Daydream came out, we had Cardboard and Gear VR. But now we have the lovely Daydream View. I have a promotional video in here, but I'm just going to skip it. So, of course, I'm sure you've all had your ear talked off about the Daydream so far, but it's really great. Mobile VR, you can go anywhere, be anywhere. You just pop your phone into the headset, and then you can transport yourself into another world. So now we're going to get to the nitty-gritty, the actual design principles, and just things to look out for. So comfort. Comfort is so important. If people are not comfortable, they will leave your experience. So we want to make sure people are actually like physically okay. So hopefully everyone will join me in doing this. So I want everyone to put their hand out in front of them. All right, so you're going to look at your finger, and then you're going to notice that behind your finger, it gets blurry. And then you focus on the background, and you notice your finger becomes blurry. So this is something called convergence. And so in VR, you have to be very careful about not having the player focus on multiple objects like very far apart from each other. It becomes very distracting and can be very uncomfortable. So if you try and have an object converge very close, it'll give migraines, eye strain. It is difficult unless you're trying to upset your player, then like totally go for it. But I would recommend, if you want a comfortable, pleasant, delightful experience, that you should kind of keep objects that you want to focus or converge on, like at arm's length or a little farther, just so it's easier for the player to actually focus on it. And field of view. Field of view is really cool and important for when you're working on UI. So most people do the whole like Iron Man 360 UI the first time they do it in VR. And then they realize, it's like, oh, this is so cool, but then they give it to somebody who doesn't have a swivel chair and doesn't want to turn around, and they realize the person can't use half of their eye. So we have this like 70 field of view that's like our little like interaction bubble. And within this bubble is 30 degrees, where people usually do most of their like heavy interactions. It's directly in front of them. People don't really like to move around. Even though it is VR, they're still a little lazy. So you try and keep any main UI interactions within that like 30-degree field of view. And then, so this is an example of the Daydream homeworld, and just to show that this is like within the 70 field of view, we keep it in front. But it's also important to have other delightful things going on around. Like in the Daydream home, we have like little animals like scooting around, and like there's a nice river. But we keep the UI kind of contained to this one area so that you have a like defined interaction space. Okay, this is gonna make some people sick. But so you want to keep a stable horizon. I'll switch to the next slide. So as you can see from, if you're watching it in 2D and becoming uncomfortable, imagine if you stick it on your face in VR. It's keeping a stable horizon line is really important. It's the same effect as if you get seasick if you're on a boat. If you have a boat game, I mean, go for it. But at the same time, you don't want to make a player sick, and that's like a surefire way to get somebody to throw up. So also, this is about motion. So if you're trying to like move objects and like move people in VR, it's okay to kind of just keep it linear, like keep it at an established rate, just so people don't become confused if they're moving really slow. Then they go really fast. It'll become very disorienting. Like that doesn't happen in the real world, so it takes time for our brain to process. Other elements can totally go at whatever speed they want, but I would recommend trying to keep it more linear. Also, just for technical people, frame rate is so important. Especially for mobile VR, you need 60 frames a second. Just because if you have it at a lower frame rate, it starts to get into the unstable horizon line. Things don't update when you move, and it gets really unsettling. And then, so 90 frames or above for 6DoF. Cool thing about AR is you can fudge these numbers a little bit. You can keep it a little bit below 60, and it'll still kind of pull off the illusion. But the higher frame rate you have, the more quality experience you have, and it's always good for everybody if you have a higher frame rate. All right, so psychological comfort. So don't put people on edges if you don't want them to just stare at the edge. So edges can be distracting. They're a very powerful tool, but if you're trying to get someone to like interact with the UI in front of you, you don't want to put them on an edge, because all they'll be thinking is, oh my God, I'm standing on an edge. So try not to do that if you want people to focus anywhere else. But if you just want them to be scared of heights, then yeah, go for it. Don't put baby in a corner. A lot of people initially will like box the player in, and like this is good for like horror games or like something where you're trying to like unsettle the player. But for just a normal experience, it's not recommended that you put them in a tiny cramped space. And also try not to put them in the middle of nowhere. So this is also a habit that I actually fall into sometimes, where I'll just put a plane down, and then whatever I'm working on I throw into the scene and just on a plane. But then you kind of feel like you're in like an endless nowhere, and it's not the best feeling. And if you're trying to get people to focus on what you're actually like trying to like test or interact with, you don't want them to feel uncomfortable, because then their feedback will be like colored with how uncomfortable they were through the environment. And also, like, having no ground plane at all is, please don't do that. Unless you have a flying experience or you're doing something where you're floating, that's totally fine. But this will scare people, especially if you're trying to test something very quickly. Having nothing there will be unsettling. And just overall, I encourage people to try and at least put like a little bit of an environment or have a like a demo environment that you can just like stick into any scene you're using. Okay, more AR stuff. So World is a Tango app that is on the Tango phones and made by Funomania, I think. I might be butchering the name. But they display some really good AR principles. So for AR, you really want to give an interactive scanning experience. So like if you're doing an AR app that requires you to scan your world and you don't like tell people that you're scanning or like how well their scan is, it gets pretty confusing. So making it a fun, interactive kind of scanning experience really helps up the quality of the game, as well as it's a fun little introduction for any AR app. And also, a tendency for people with Tango phones is that they just want to stay very stable. They'll move around and contort their bodies, but they won't actually step forward, which is the whole point. You can walk around the world. So to prompt players to move is very, very important. And we get this with this little dude just yelling at you, be like, hey, come closer. And then also just prompting interactions, because it is difficult sometimes if something's happening behind you and you want to prompt the player to turn around. The whole use of this little narrator robot doodad dude is really nice because he will draw your eye to like what your next interaction should be. And so you could do this with particles, you could do this with like little characters. Try to avoid doing it with like a little like UI kind of radar thing, because doing it more diegetically will like really help the experience become a lot nicer. All right, my day-to-day. So I am a prototyper, and usually my day starts with a problem. Usually I get this problem, and then I make storyboards. So I don't make storyboards like normal film storyboards. I usually start with a circle, draw a really bad stick man, and then draw whatever interaction is happening. Now, the reason I do a circle is because I want to think about the entire scene, how the player is becoming totally encompassed in this. It's not a directed view because they can look wherever, so you need to consider all 360. And then also I'm like, oh, here's a cute environment with trees. Sometimes I'll do really quick sketches, like I was nervous about this talk, so I thought I'd sketch out an idea for a speaking app in VR. And you just do it really quickly. You do call-outs, like quick, and like doesn't have to be pretty, obviously, through my drawing skills. But I think actually the best way to prototype or concept for a prototype is to use Tilt Brush. So, or any drawing app, period, in VR. The faster you get into VR, I think, the better, because that way you can conceptualize it, you'll know what's going on, and you'll know how to attack it when you're actually making the app or scene or tool. And before I make anything, I do a search. I know it's ironic that someone from Google is telling you to Google stuff, but it's really important just to realize that you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Because I have so many times written different like code or like found an asset on this store that I was like, oh, I just could have bought this and it would have saved me hours, which is probably cheaper for Google. So it's just don't reinvent the wheel. There's tons and tons of information out on the internet, and it'll help you a lot. So then I do volumetric layout. So that's pretty much blockout phase. There's a bunch of different names for it. But essentially, I move some cubes around and get everything where it should be, and that's good enough. And then I throw whatever I'm making at as many people as possible. I am the annoying person who goes around the office and is like, have you tried my demo yet? Because user feedback is so important. You can have UXRs, so user experience researchers. They are your best tool in your tool belt. They will take your stuff and be that annoying person for you if you need. And you get like important feedback. You can change it. You could, because you are not the only person who's going to be using this. You need to realize that some people get more motion sick than others. Some people find this like scary. Some people, like, you have to consider all factors, and getting your stuff in front of a lot of people is good testing, and it'll make you make better products. And then I iterate like crazy. And I go and get frustrated and come back and make a bunch of pointless folders. And rinse and repeat. So I iterate, I test, I iterate, I test, I iterate, I test. And then I get to where I'm happy-ish, and then I share the tool out with my team, or it's an interaction, or it's an app, and then I kind of like bring this little hobbled thing together, and I show it to a software engineer, and they're like, what is that? And I was like, it works though. So they usually take it, and they'll either pull it apart, use it as is, but it's all in the effort to making better stuff and making better products. Yeah. So I don't know what my time is, but...
Got a whole minute for questions.
Yay!
Hopefully some of the audience have some super compact question. Anybody? Or a long question, I'm sure we'll recover.
Anybody?
Or did you do the perfect talk that has
I
left
think I
nothing?
did.
Yeah, it must be it. Oh, there's one at the back. No, you didn't
Yeah.
do the perfect talk.
Oh, wow.
So the Tango and the Daydream, currently the Daydream blocks off the cameras, so you can't use them together. Is there a technical reason for that, or is it something that's going to be allowed in the future?
I'm not sure about the technical reason. We blocked everything off so that light wouldn't like bleed in. I'm not really sure about the future of what's going to happen to the headset. So I've seen people actually drill through the headset to get access to the camera. So I would MacGyver it. I mean, that would be fun. Well, I'm not encouraging you to destroy stuff, but at the same time, it's we also have NFC chips on the panels that your phone goes in and it recognizes. So those NFC tags are right where the camera is.
Thank you.
Great. Well, we should probably call that it. So thank you, Mary. Brilliant stuff.
Yay.